Welcome to Glow State. I'm your host, Courtney Page. As a former executive recruiter, career coach, actor, and yoga teacher, I'm demystifying how people have designed the creative career and life that was meant for them, and how you can too. Now, for this week's episode, let's get glowing. Our glow guest today is a truly glowing soul, none other than intuitive mindset coach and Reiki master and teacher, Jen Cabot. Jen is a gifted intuitive who guides her clients into alignment by arming them with powerful self-knowledge and intuitive strategies through her unique spiritual intuitive coaching and Reiki healing. She has a rare and honestly mind-blowing way of tuning into her clients, feeling what they're feeling, then bringing it down to earth and creating very practical approaches to extremely abstract concepts. She is a modern day witch in the most positive and inspiring way. Jen, thank you so much for coming on Glow State. Oh my gosh, everything inside of me, I'm like, yeah, I am a little bit of a witch. I love this. Yeah, if anyone is, it's you. Oh my gosh. But thank you so much for coming on. You were like, of course, I know you through coaching. Jen has helped me a lot with my own journey. And after like my first session with you, I was like, oh my gosh, this woman is like so special. Sometimes you just meet people where you're like, they're just like special. And that's how I feel about you. I think you're awesome. I also want to just quickly say that this is going to be the first of 2 episodes with Jen, because as we were kind of iterating about what we wanted to talk about, there was just so much that I think our listeners will get from you. And I didn't want to keep you on here for like 3 hours because I don't know if anybody really wants to talk to me for 3 hours. So we're going to break it up a little bit. And also I want to say that she is our in-house spiritual coach at Glow State Coaching. So as a client of mine, if anything comes up in a session that seems more like it's in Jen's court, I will totally gift you a session so you get the best care possible. So Jen, first, this is my like go-to question just to get the ball rolling. If you're at a dinner party and someone comes up to you and they're like, Jen, what do you do? What would you say?
Ooh, I love this question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So for me as a psychic, spiritual coach and Reiki master, I see pathways for people who are in a point of transition. And from there, I have this sort of innate ability to really tune into like your preferred method of self-sabotage, for some reason, all of your lessons, like all of the patterns. So it's really about taking everything out of the closets and kind of putting it in the living room and then finding a really beautiful way to unpack it and make it make sense and rearrange and purge and maybe even donate some old patterns that are out of alignment. But in just, I really truly have sort of this knack for being able to really hone in on where you're at and where you're going. And then all of the things that you're creating for distraction or all of the outdated sort of karma that you can with that's getting in the way. So that would be my nutshell sort of Cliff Notes version. And obviously too, from the work that like, it's so energetic and we do a lot of dabbling. So it's nothing about it is linear, but it is definitely seeing the pathway and then really supporting clients and aligning with it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so one thing that I was like, oh, this is the person to ask this question. This word has come up. I had never heard it until maybe like a year ago, but the word woo, like this is woo. I think it's like it was woo and now people just say woo. Okay, so what is woo? Can you like tell me what that means?
Well, I think it's a modern day lighthearted way of approaching this work because so the woo is it sort of makes me giggle because I'm like,
I know it's like such a great word. Like I love saying it. Yeah. But sometimes people are like, oh, that's too woo for me. So I want to kind of bring it into like what it means to you and someone that works in the woo, I guess.
Yeah. So when I tune into that and when I hear that sort of language, so the woo can often feel really inaccessible and not really tangible. And so, so when someone is feeling a little put off by like, oh, that's sort of way outside of my comfort zone to even consider or integrate into my reality, it's too woo, right? It's too out of the box. And which is true. Like they're spot on. Like everything about the woo is weird because most of it is like, you can't You can't really quantify it. It's one of those things where you're like, okay, I know there's something here. I know there's something that exists, but I can't grab a hold of it. Like we often can't see the woo with our eyes. We have to see with our spiritual eye.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very different skill set. And for many of us, we're so conditioned to like intellectualize everything that the idea of like, oh, there's this whole other realm that we can't see, we can't touch, and it exists. I feel like that's what people are kind of referring to. And so for me, my work is a lot about blending both of that, like is feeling expansive with things that are feeling also practical and grounded so that you can actually integrate the learnings and the growth.
Yeah. So is woo really woo? Because it's because it seems real. Like all of the things that you're saying are like, it's just all of those kind of things that seem very intangible. So it's hard to kind of quantify them. It's hard to apply whatever, like a practice to them without, you're not going to get an immediate results from it. But I was talking to somebody the other day and it was like, no, this is real. Like this is real stuff.
Yeah.
And so is it really that woo, or is this just something that we all walk around with kind of with that like spiritual eye shut a bit?
No, I think you're spot on in the questioning of this and sort of the exploration. I love your mind, by the way. When we talk about woo, it can feel really taboo. It can feel really sort of black magic, witchcraftery, like just, again, this realm that doesn't really make sense until you start to have real life experience or you have data to really start to counter the intuitive, the skeptic that really wants to debunk the woo. And I remembered this actually, this is just coming forward, so I'll share this. When I first became a Reiki master and I was offering healing sessions, and I remember, have you ever had Reiki? I can't remember. Yeah. Okay. Right. So Reiki, like there's no manipulation of muscles, right? There's nothing tangible about it beyond the fact that you get a little blissed out and you can feel like the warmth and something is moving, like something is happening. And I just remember like working with a client and at one point being like, this shit is too woo. And like saying that and then checking my hands to be like, are they even on? Like, are they even hot? Like, is anything even happening?
Yeah.
And it was really only truly because my skeptic, like I just didn't have enough data to be like, no, this is safe. You can trust this. There is something to this. And so I feel like if someone is coming to the table from a place of dismissiveness and being like, oh, that's too woo, it's only because they haven't had enough experience with like synchronistic meetings or opportunities or manifestations, or like they just don't have enough data to be like, no, this is real and it's right. Like,
yeah. And I think what you're saying is that a lot, or at least what I'm getting from it, a lot of people have kind of almost like a disbelief or like a wall up to where the reality and weird like can't really coexist, right? Like if it's weird, then it's weird. That doesn't belong in like reality in my everyday or whatever, because it's just weird. But it's not. Like life is weird, right? I mean, like weird shit happens all the time. So yeah. And that actually, you just hit on something. Like literally my next thing was like dealing with skeptics. So as somebody who works in this, what is that like? Because I think you also use the word psychic, which is very like when I told my husband the first time I was meeting with you, he was like, oh, and we're like super into it. But he was like, oh, that's like really interesting that she leads with that, because that might turn a lot of people away. And I was like, well, that's okay. Like, that's the point kind of. But yeah, like, how do you deal with skeptics? If you're at that dinner party and someone's like, oh, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I'm a psychic, spiritual, intuitive mindset coach. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I don't.
I love it.
I really arrived at the sweet spot of like, what other people think of me is none of my business. And also when the very beginning, when I was newly out of my sort of spiritual closet and I was playing with words more like intuitive, right? And like this faith, right? I intuit things. And I really arrived at this place where like, it's okay that this work doesn't resonate with everyone. And people get really squeamish about it because part of the psychic sort of, what do we want to say? Like, well, I guess container is just means that I'm like highly energetic. And it's really easy for me to pick up on the things that you're not saying. And it's really easy then for me to see these little pockets of like taboo bits that you're stuffing away. And I'm like, oh, like it's time for them to all come out. I will also say 100% of the time, whenever I meet with a client, even if I've had routine sessions with them, their skeptic always reveals itself first, always. And so part of where I'm at now in my practice is that I'm always given information that is so specific to them to lead with initially in the beginning of the session that like their skeptic has no choice but to be like, oh, like, okay, like how did she know that? The skeptic is just a protector part. That's all it is. It's just there to really keep us safe. And I get that, right? Like if my work is to call you absolutely out and forward, there's a lot of fear in being exposed for a lot of people. And so they want to hide, right? They want to posture, they want to peacock. But if I'm at a dinner party and someone is clearly not into what I'm throwing out, I'm fine with that because I'm not interested in converting anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the key where it's like, I think that just speaks to everything. Okay. So it's just bringing up this thing that I heard the other day where most people, when they go off to try a new thing, like if they're going to go, whether it's stopping drinking or going out for a new job or whatever it is, or completely switching, move it, whatever, like life change out of the ordinary, something that they don't associate you with. The number one thing that people are worried about are what their friends think. I think what you're getting at is so powerful because it's a heart-centered thing that you do, right? And you have to have that awareness yourself because if someone doesn't get it, they don't get it. And if you let that affect you, that's like your whole being, right? So it's okay that not everybody gets it. Like, that's cool.
Yep. And I've also had a few clients, not many, but definitely in the beginning that came in and all they did was test, right? Like forward, and then they would push back and then I would get more information and then they would totally kick it out of the room. And in those moments, actually, it's super imperative for me to be absolutely connected to my integrity, my truth, not because a lot of times this information is so spot on. It's jarring, right? To receive such absolute truth from practically a stranger and being so seen. And so for me, I know that when a client is sort of moaning or like someone at the dinner table is kind of getting a little squeamish, it's like there's just a part of them that's really fearful of being completely exposed. And I can have compassion for that and not take it on. Like it's not mine, right, to navigate. That's why in this work too, I feel like just to kind of loop back around to the woo thing. So a lot of times people have a lot of non-belief in this world because there can be a lot of like playing off of people's vulnerability, right? And not a lot in that sort of space.
Like taking advantage of that. And their naivete or whatever. Yep.
And so for me to just completely even avoid that, it's my job to make sure I am 100% always grounded in this energy of integrity where I'm only speaking truth, not like filling in to like fluff up the message or like make it prettier or but that I'm always crystal clear on what it means when I receive information. Like, is this a yes? Is this a no? Is this a line? Is this? But yeah, it's interesting. The whole world of skeptics. For me, I really have heaps of compassion and space to hold everyone sort of in wherever they are at. I'm not a psychic pusher.
Okay. So that kind of brings up, I want to go back a little bit to like when you were a kid. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Cool. I don't know that I can answer that. What I can say is that I was super wired to protect and serve. Even as a little munchkin, I just remember being so overly invested in what was happening inside of my family, making sure that like my brother was safe and taken care of, that my parents were well. There was a lot of heat, a lot of anger, a lot of rage. And my father was in the military. So it's just the four of us that just kind of traveled. So I didn't have anything to dilute it or to distract me. I was just always in this environment of caretaking and nurturing, or probably more so caretaking and over responsibility.
Yeah.
So I don't ever remember being like, when I grow up, I want to, like, I just didn't.
It's interesting. Yeah, because I think that a lot of people have that. So it's interesting that you don't. So you followed a pretty traditional path going out and you were a social worker, you have your master's in it, and you were on this very stable path and you had a baby. I got this from knowing you, and also like from your website, you have it. So I'm not like exposing you.
You're fine.
But you went to high school, you got married pretty quickly, you had a baby, you were on this kind of like great stable path, right? And something that you say on your website was, I thought this was women's work and my life's purpose, serving, caretaking, marriage, and bearing children. I wanted way more. So, like, first of all, thank you for putting that on your website. Because I think that's like a huge common mindset that a lot of women have. And I think a lot of women don't feel like they can follow that ambition. Like they know that they want more, but it's like, but now I have a baby. Like, what am I supposed to, how would that even work? Or for 1,000 other valid reasons. So I guess, when did that realization hit you that you were like, this isn't it? Like, I want more.
Yeah. So my story isn't glamorous. There's a lot of pain in it. Because there was so much emotional violence growing up, it transferred into every single relationship I've ever been in. So I was serving as a school counselor, and I was pregnant with my second baby. And I remember this premonition coming in, and it was like something about me getting my master's in psychology or something. And I remember actively kicking it out and being like, that's not for me anymore. I'm stuck in this. And it was a really sort of raw, sobering thing to own. Like, I made that choice to marry a man that I knew wasn't my person. However, he was my person for the lessons I needed around my own capacity to self-actualize and just all the things, right? So it was probably, it might have been like 2 years after that I called in a really intense catalyst that really flipped my entire world upside down. I didn't see it coming. I was blindsided. At that point, that was when I really woke up to like, holy shit, like I've been sleeping. And I didn't, and like the most bizarre thing, like I can share this, it's like I didn't, at that point, like self-help books weren't really a thing. I don't think podcasts weren't really, but I had all this instant, all of a sudden awakened information around like, this isn't it. Like, this is not the life. He's clearly not my person. However, right, like again, he was my person. He literally opened up the door through his affair and I was able to walk out, right? That, I would say 2014 was really when I began sort of my trek, my journey of calling back my power and really owning that this is not common for people to have information about other people the way that I had information. And also just experiencing myself from a lens of like, no, I'm lovable just because, like, I don't have to work for it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't have to take care of the family in order to get love. I don't have to like leak out and sacrifice in order to be seen as a beautiful woman. Like, I can just own that I am. So it's sort of this mixed bag of a lot of muckiness that I traveled through to really get to this point of like complete empowerment of like, me and me.
Yeah. I just like, I'm thinking of the lotus flower because it goes through the mud when it comes, and it has to go through the mud in order to get everything that it needs to become the flower. And it's like such a pretty flower. Yeah. And so I guess, what made you feel like after this catalyst happened and you kind of woke up a little bit, it's one thing to be like, okay, now I can kind of see clearly or clearer. I now kind of realize that this gift I have is a gift and it's not something that everybody has. It's one thing to acknowledge all of that and to know it. It's a different thing to feel like you had the space to embrace that ambition and that intuition. So what happened that made you feel confident enough or allowed to embrace that?
Yeah, this kind of moves me a little bit to tears because like I'm tuning back into the energy of that time because it wasn't an overnight thing. This has been almost a decade in the making. And when my former husband confessed his affair, I remember for whatever reason, this energy inside of me just came up and roared. And I wasn't angry. I was hurt, but I really actually saw him as a little boy, and everything inside of me was like, oh my God, this has nothing to do with me. This is about him and wherever he is in his process. And simultaneously, this whole thing came online. And it was non-negotiable from that point forward. Like, I couldn't as many times as I tried to deviate from my calling, I guess we can call it, I
What do you
couldn't.
mean? Like how, like what would happen?
It was just this like, in that process, I literally felt a part of myself rise and I felt really tall. Like it was just this energetic and I was like, oh, he's this little boy and I just feel really tall right now. And then I found the University of Santa Monica. So everything inside of me was like, oh, this is the yes and. Like I'm a healer and like this spiritual psychology thing. This is where I'm like, this was the premonition. This was the premonition. So at that point, I just kept following the breadcrumbs that felt so, because I was in so much pain that what felt really nurturing was super clear to me. Like it was
Right.
just so polar opposite that it wasn't great. So for me, it was like, okay, cool. I'm going to take my alimony and I'm going to fly out to California once a month for 2 years. And I'm a single mom and I'm divorced. And like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to fucking do it because it was just so non-negotiable. Like as often as I tried to be like, okay, I'm too tired. I just want to quit. Right. There would just be a series of events that would like come on board or like super supportive friends that would come into my life to be encouragers or like a mentor would appear to be like, this is for you, like do this for yourself. So it was things like that. It was like just these little breadcrumbs where I was like, okay, I can keep going, right? I can
Like this feels good. Next. This feels good. Next.
Yeah. And there were like little resting points and there was like just, so that's been sort of my trek these last 10 years where it's just like these constant little breadcrumbs that I'm just digesting and ingesting. And
Yeah.
so that was really big for me to complete that programming and then really launch into like integrating all of the learnings and all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So just when you were going out to California, just as Emma, I have two kids as well. And mine are probably around the age that yours were at when you were doing that. The first thing that came to mind was like, did you bring your kids with you? Did you have someone watch them when you were
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Together between my parents or my former partner, I would, because it was one weekend a month and they were 12-hour long class days. So I would fly out like on a Thursday, sleep on my girlfriend's couch for school, red-eye flight home on a Sunday so I could pick my kids up from school. And then
Oh,
like,
wow.
it was intense.
See, that's the stuff that I love to know because I feel like a lot of people hear like, oh, and then I did this course or I got my degree and it's like, let's hear about how, because I think that's where a lot of, especially like moms or single parents, whether it's a mom or a single dad are like, well, that's great that they did that. But like I have kids and I'd like, how do I do that? But okay, great. That's how you did it. Like, that's where like the village comes in, right? Where it's like, it doesn't have to just be answering to them. So that's like so good to know. So what does it mean? I guess everybody has intuition, right? And you've kind of touched on this, but I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into it. What is the difference between having intuition and being an intuitive?
I don't know that there is a difference. I own it in that way. I feel like we're all intuitive. It's a muscle. It's a spiritual muscle. And the more that you lean into it, the louder it becomes. I feel like for me, it's been a huge part of claiming my power. It's just being the fact that I am a psychic. And I would probably even go on the record and say a medium because I can channel in family members that have passed or those sorts of things. But I don't know that there is like a hard and fast distinction between intuiting and being an intuitive because it's just energy.
Yeah.
That's all that's happening is that you're learning how to finally tune in and read energy to the point where you're no longer compromising yourself out of what you know. So, like we all feel it, like something is off. You feel that. You don't have to be intuitive to intuit, right? Okay. That something is off or something is on or something's a yes. We're just really great about like talking ourselves out of that knowingness.
Yeah. So is there a way that somebody can like cultivate more in their, like you said, it's a muscle. So can you work out that muscle? Like, can you make it stronger?
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite thing is to really support clients and like speaking it out loud. Like do the where like you roll up next to someone at a stoplight and before you look over to see what's happening in the car next to you, like tune in. Just see what you can feel. Like, what are you picking up on? Like, what's the vibe going on in that car? And then when you look over, you're going to feel it as a direct yes in your heart because your heart will be expanded. But if it's like an ego story that you've just created about someone that's next to you, you're going to feel that as contraction. So for me, I like to play little games like that where it's like, well, just speak it out loud. Because a lot of this too is about self-trust and really
totally. That's basically what intuition is, right? Like you're trusting your gut, right? That's like the terminology. It's all about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of the first Reiki sessions when I first started offering healing sessions, I had this gentleman come in and he sat on my table and there was this whole like entourage of lions. Like I saw this, like all his little spirit animals come in and they like went underneath the table. And I had this moment where I was like, okay, like this is a test, right? Like either I can speak out loud and sound really woo and crazy or right? And so I just kind of gently led with like, I'm not sure this has resonance for you, but when you came in, there was this whole entourage of lions and he chuckled and he was like, well, I am a Leo. I was like, oh, so that makes total sense to me. Why?
That's funny. That's funny. And he was, I guess if he's there for Reiki, he's probably open to that kind of stuff, which is also like, kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's like your audience, like if they're here, if they come to you for whatever you're doing, like they're probably cool with what you're doing, right? Like you can already kind of stand in your place and confidence with just the fact that someone's in front of you, right? Yeah. So that's interesting. Okay. So there's the car experiment, which now I'm going to do every time I'm at a red light, like for sure. Okay. So everybody knows that like I had a weird feeling in my stomach. Are there other kind of signs of intuition that that can help somebody recognize? Like that's not just like a weird thing that happened. Like that's actually intuition.
Yeah. I genuinely feel like our gut is sort of where we process most of our initial intuitive hits. Like you're always, and we say this, right? The saying, right? I have a gut feeling. Like right? So we use that language a lot. Then oftentimes though, many of us dismiss it or we talk ourselves out of the gut feeling only to actually have the gut feeling come into fruition, right? Right. Thing or the circumstance. So I would say, so this is where we actually have to get deeper because this is the work, is because oftentimes there are a lot of protector parts that get activated. Like if I were to fresh out of the gates, be like, I had this gut feeling and then act on it, I'm sure I would have blown myself up. Like I'm sure I would have been like, right? Because sometimes it's too confrontational. So this is where I like to actually lean into the prayer of like, okay, so I had this gut feeling. So universe, show me a sign, give me a signal, give me something to confirm what it is that I'm knowing. Because what we don't want to do is exchange our power by then saying like, okay, I had this gut feeling, but I don't know. Like that's an instant transaction versus I have this feeling.
What would a sign look like? So, yeah.
So for me, sort of, well, it can often be like a random message from a stranger or like you just happen to catch a certain word within a conversation from the person at the grocery store or something, right? And it's like entire body just all of a sudden gets ignited. You just feel this kind of electrical pulse that moves through you. So the energy. And in that moment, you lock into the yes. It's those sorts of things. I work a lot too with spirit animals. They're constantly crossing my path. And then I'll go and look up whatever the meaning is, read the message. So that becomes a sign too. But there's this like electrical, energetic, like click that happens when you see a message, it could be a song that pops on the radio that you're like, oh, wait a minute. Wait, I haven't heard this song ever. And the lyrics are like coursing through my core right now. A lot of times it's things like that. Or numerology, like that's another way to get information, like a series of numbers, like 111, 22. Like there's a lot of energy and messages inside of that as well.
Yeah. And so numerology is when those, the same number appears multiple times and each of that number, whether it's like 2 or 5 or whatever, will have a different meaning behind it, right? So you mentioned spirit animals and they kind of cross your path a lot. What can you like explain spirit animals if someone like has absolutely no idea what that means?
What that is, sure. So it's just another realm, like another energetic realm of messengers. So okay, now we're gonna get a little woo. We're gonna get
yeah. That's why you're here.
Okay, go. So this is not like the Jen Cabot show, right? This isn't like me as an intuitive picking up on all these things. There is a literal shift in consciousness that happens when I tune in to get information around what you're presenting as an energetic being. Through my journey of really expanding into the gifts, I've really been able to connect into spirit animals. So this whole realm of animal messengers, in other words. And it's just like you've probably heard of like guides. Sometimes we use this word, right? Like I have guides, or sometimes people will say like my spiritual community, right? Or even like just saying like universe. It's just acknowledging that there's a spiritual sort of entity being that you're connecting into and connected to. So the whole world of working with animals is the same sort of way. I subscribe to the truth that nothing is by accident. So if there's like right now, I just had like 2 dragonflies cross my path and I'm like dragonflies, I don't actually know the meaning of dragonflies. I wonder what that is.
So there's meanings behind each animal.
Yes.
That's the other thing, right? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. There's messages in there. So like when I work with clients, oftentimes animals will channel in, and I don't always know the messages, which I think is really yummy too, because then clients can go and do their own sort of research and see if it resonates with them. But yeah, so they just come in to kind of add information in the same way with like numerology, right? In the same way of seeing things like that.
Okay. And something that you touched on that I want to kind of unpack a little bit is the concept of synchronicity. So how does someone know if you don't subscribe to the idea that something could be random, but if someone is open to the idea that things can be random, right? How does a person differentiate a random happening to synchronicity in their life? Like,
so this is where, again, I lean into this whole like expansion contraction thing. So speaking things out, like if you've just put out the prayer, right, where you're like, okay, universe, like show me my next intelligent step forward. And you're really leaving yourself open to kind of get those little like breadcrumbs of inspired action. And something comes in and you're like, is that the thing that I'm supposed to respond to? For me, a really cool measure is you try to then take a step to the left or take a step to the right. So so when you're aligned, that's how you can get that information. But then if you try to waver from that truth and like debunk it, dismiss it, and so you either step to the left or to the right. So in other words, if the universe is saying, not this job, the next one, right? Like, yep, this is super shiny and it's super close, but it's not quite right. And say you act on it anyway and you submit your application, do the thing, you're going to feel that because you're going to feel drained. You're going to feel off. You're going to feel disconnected versus if something is genuinely synchronized and it's a yes, or it's a message for you, you're going to feel lit up.
Yeah.
You're going to feel sort of clear. Like it's not going to feel like a push sort of energy. So that's why for me too, like speaking things out loud, because if it's a yes, you're going to feel expansive in your heart. If it's a no, you're going to feel contraction. Because that's typically then where all of the stuff comes in.
Yeah. So there are different types of intuition, right? Like when you're talking about, like you mentioned, like sometimes I can hear people who have passed on. There's just through my own little research, there's the different clairs, right? There's like the one that I think most people are familiar with is like clairvoyant, right? What is that? Like, how does that fit into all of this? Or is that something different?
No, it absolutely fits in. So I think there's 4 different clairs. It's been a hot minute since I've looked at all of them, but I think there's 4 different ways you can intuit. I like to see it as a spectrum. So like for me, such a mixed bag. It's more like a video that sort of gets presented to me. So there's like a little shift in consciousness and then I'll see little snippets, but I'll also hear messages. And the beauty is when you can actually travel the spectrum of the 4 different clairs and you can actually learn how to develop each of those. It's like they're senses, right? Like people intuit energy from things that they hear or see or feel, or like there's just different. I know for me too, it's the tone, it's the tonage that the tonality that people have around certain words that then triggers the information to come forward. or it triggers me to shift consciousness to get the information.
And follow where that came from. Yeah.
Exactly. A tether. It's just this energetic tether that I can follow. So absolutely. Yeah, there's the four clairs. And I do feel like it's meant to serve like a spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think people probably started to put them in like categories because that's like what we feel like we need to do with everything.
Right.
Everything has to be like labeled and whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. So if someone wanted to become interested in spirituality, what advice would you give to somebody who's like looking to start that for themselves?
Yeah. Well, first to get really clear on the definition of what it means and what it doesn't mean. To be a spiritual person means that you're connected to the energy of love with a capital L. So it just means that you are connected to that universal, like, I belong here. Like, that's all that the whole world of spirituality means. It just means love.
Oh my gosh. I love
Right?
that. I love that's great. That gives permission to have it be whatever it needs to be for you.
Whatever it needs to be. And I actually appreciate these last couple of years because I think for a little while there, we were trying to even put it into a box. Of like, well,
yeah,
this, right? It has to look like you go to yoga and you meditate and for me, it's like, well, only if that's authentic, only if that actually hits your radar for like, this is how I connect into universal love.
right.
That's all it is. And so when someone's beginning their journey, it just means that they're beginning the journey of eliminating all of the distractions that keep them from staying plugged into universal love.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah. And like beyond that, there are a bazillion ways we can access it. And there's no cookie cutter, like do this and you're going to get there. It's everybody's journey it's like a fingerprint.
Right.
So,
yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Yeah. It is like a fingerprint. Okay. And last, I just want to bring this up because I know it's something that you offer and it's something that, and again, I don't know like if this is like a red car thing where I know you offer it and I saw it and then all of a sudden now I'm seeing it everywhere. But what are Akashic records?
I love the Akashic. So the Akashic records are you familiar with Abraham Hicks?
Yes. Yeah. That's my meditation. Like it's like the super old, that's like the meditation I use. Yeah. Yeah. She has like, I love her voice. Yeah.
I love her voice too. And so she's super connected to this spiritual body, this entity. The Akashic records, I sort of like to think of it as such. And so the Akashic stores the records of all of ours from the inception of our soul's time. So it holds past, present, and future versions of ourselves based on our legal names. And the Akasha documents every single decision, every single experience, which is why that whole like past life thing.
Yeah.
So I can be completely transparent and say that for me, the Akasha was how I felt really safe to clock into intuition and this whole other realm because it gave me the framework to like, no, I'm just plugging into the system and then plugging out because the Akasha works with prayer and there's a lot of intention setting. No, it's more so it's just energy that will trigger me into the Akasha, but it's another way of being able to really access your soul's contracts and lessons. And yeah, it's really beautiful. So because we're moving, right? Dimensions from 3D to 5D anyway. So you
might as well go for it, right? You might as well meet yourself there.
Yeah. You might as well go for gold.
Oh my gosh. Well, that is awesome. Okay. So now that we have this great foundation of like what intuition is, kind of your backstory, in our next episode with you, what we're going to be doing for those who are listening is look at how all of this stuff that we talked about today works its way into your job and career and your job, Jen's job and Jen's career, and how she kind of worked that into a life that she loves and a job that she loves, and how intuition and really connecting intuition and ambition can work in like any job and any career. So that's our next episode with Jen. Jen, you're amazing. This is awesome. And now I want to do an Akashic reading like immediately. It's so cool. It's just such a like, oh my God, it's so cool. All of it's so cool. Thank you so much. Is there anything I didn't bring up that you feel like called to bring up?
I feel pretty expanded and wobbly. So I feel like we did some travel, I think.
We did. Yeah. We went across the universe and back.
I think we did. I think we did. So no, this just feels really spot on. And I'm really looking forward to grounding it in the like, now what, right? Like, how does this all come together? Because I know that the people, like your listeners, most of them are probably empathic or highly sensitive and are also probably questioning like, wait, I know things about things and what do I do with this knowing? And you and I have definitely worked in this way too of like, what do you do when you're sensitive and what does that look like? And
so we're going to do that in the next episode because that's one of the first things that I said, that you kind of take these really abstract concepts, all the things that we talked about today, and kind of bring them back down to earth. And I think we kind of vibe in that because with my coaching, one of the things that I like to do is kind of create a practical framework in order to then go and pursue your purpose, because a lot of the time that can get wobbly as well. So thank you so much. I love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Glow State. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show and then be sure to share it with a friend you know who would love a little glow in their life. I'll see you next time. Now, go glow.